The Rebel Capitalist Show. After you got well, I think you kind of had this epiphany moment and your life really changed and changed for the better, not just from a standpoint of personal health, but also from your financial position. So can you walk us and kind of tell us that story?
You know, the health crisis went on for a good 2.5, 3 years. And during that time, I couldn't work, couldn't think, couldn't work, went through suicidal periods. And when you've got a business with overhead and employees and, expenses, that tends to drain the bank account very, very quickly. Plus, I'd say at least $10,000 a month in medical expenses, none of which was covered by insurance, right? So right. The big priority became, oh my gosh, I need to figure out how to make passive investment income, because I don't know, or I didn't know at the time, if I was ever going to be able to work again. And so that became a huge priority. How do I make passive investment income that's going to pay the bills, even if this lasts a couple of more years, whatever it may be?
Yeah.
And, as an entrepreneur, I'd always considered my business my source of passive income. Never in the world that I think I'd go and just have that ability taken away from me overnight without any kind of foresight or planning or anything like that. And so that became piece number one. But the fact that this was really a brain injury was also a huge gift, because healing from that required me to go through every kind of therapy that you can think of to heal the brain. And it forced me to learn about neurochemistry and how all of that works, where I'm taking neurochemical tests all of the time and taking tests and learning about my neurotransmitters and their different levels and how those affect mood and decision making. I did EMDR therapy, hypnotherapy, 9 ketamine IVs, transcranial magnetic therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, an MRI scan, lots of brain scans. And so a good solid 2.5 years, plant medicines, wachuma, MDMA therapy, psilocybin and mushrooms, anything that anyone could suggest, I would go do. And it really just helped me figure out the nervous system. And what was interesting is, as I was going through those therapies, you naturally uproot and start to look at your past in a very different way. And you start to see the patterns in your life and your behaviors and your decisions, and why you had those behaviors and why you made the decisions that you made. And all of a sudden, I just had this huge, light bulb moment where it's like, man, I've been really good at making money my entire life, but I haven't been that great at keeping it.
Right.
And this is a very common, I'm not going to say pattern, but profile for entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs that I know, 80, 90%, are very comfortable with taking risks and they love adrenaline. It's just our profile. It's how we do what we do, and we can do it comfortably. But when you apply that profile to investing money and trying to keep money, it's the exact opposite that That's you right. want, right? And so, we have this term in the entrepreneur space called cycling. And, if you talk to an old time entrepreneur vet, how many times have you cycled, man? And that means how many times have you lost your fortune or made it and then lost it and then made it back? Yeah. You've completed a full cycle, right? It's that common.
I'm just laughing because that resonates with me so much, Mike. I've gone through a cycle, or actually a couple cycles myself. Yes. And, I've never taken a finance class or an econ class or anything like that. I almost flunked out of high school, and I retired in 2012. Yeah. And when I retired, I got into investing just because I wanted to invest my own money. And that's one of the first things that I noticed. I said, wait a minute here. This entrepreneur game, or what makes you a good entrepreneur, the skill set, is pretty much the opposite of what would make you a good investor. So I need to completely retrain my brain, because to your point, as an entrepreneur, I was, I figured I was taking calculated risk, but I was very, very comfortable taking what most people would consider a huge amount of risk. and doing that over and over and over again. And I did have a little bit of, well, I should say I do, I guess, have a little bit of the adrenaline bug, you know, with the fast cars and the rock climbing and the skydiving and the et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I just laugh as you're saying that, because that's exactly how my life played out.
And it's identical for most entrepreneurs, right? And so this is a very common theme. And if you go look at any famous celebrity or famous athlete, it's the same thing. Yeah. Many of them have made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and they've lost it all and declared bankruptcy, right? And so how can people who are this talented or that successful or that intelligent continue to fall into this pattern? And what I realized, it's a result of two different things. The first is your neurochemical addictions. And so we all have 5 hormones that are circulating through our body at every moment of every day. And these are the hormones that essentially create emotions. And then those emotions lead to decisions. And those decisions are filtered by really the second most important component here, which is your subconscious programming. And so an example of this would be, you know, what happens when someone gets anxiety or stressed out? And if you look at the media is designed to cause anxiety and stress, right? Yeah, and so that causes cortisol in your system, which creates the feeling of stress and anxiety that you feel in your body. And your brain doesn't like cortisol. Your cortisol tells your brain, hey, we don't like this. We need to go do something else. And the way that your body counters cortisol is either through dopamine, serotonin, or oxytocin. Those are your feel-good hormones. And dopamine is what we feel whenever we feel pleasure. Whenever we buy something, eat ice cream, have a glass of wine that we like, whatever it may be that gives us pleasure, that's dopamine. Whenever we are checking our sales in our shopping cart system, you know, if you're doing a promotion or a launch and you're seeing your numbers go up or your crypto portfolio grow up, right? That's dopamine that you're getting. Serotonin is all around status and confidence. And so when you go on Instagram and you see other people who are living a really great life, and if you happen to be a person that makes you feel bad or less than, that comparison syndrome, that's serotonin. And that's serotonin driving you to go acquire these status symbols, because status, back in the day, the higher your status was, the greater your chances for survival were, the greater your chances of procreation were, the more benefits you had, et cetera. So your body has a genomic drive to want you to pursue higher levels of status, and it does that through serotonin. And so it's interesting when you look at what happens with entrepreneurs specifically. Why is it? It's almost like a rite of passage when you make your first million in entrepreneurship. You got to go buy a Porsche, a Lambo, or a Ferrari, right? It's almost like it's just this weird thing that we all just do, and we don't know why we do it. But
unfortunately, I still do that, Mike.
Yeah. Well, that's, I thought for me, I've loved cars my entire life. I'm just a car guy. But when I went through this process, I'm like, no, that was actually my brain latching on to this status symbol. It happened to be a car in this case. For other people, it's watches, or it might be boats, or it might be shoes. For me, it was cars. And it wants you to set up a public-facing status symbol so that, especially if you're single, that signals to the potential mates that you would have out there that, hey, you're a high-quality potential mate. You're not aware of any of this happening, right? And that can lead to some bad financial decisions, because your subconscious brain and your genes don't really care about your retirement plan 20 years from now. It cares about today and your survival today and procreation today. Then we go back to the neurotransmitters. We get stress and anxiety. Well, what do we do when we feel stress and anxiety? We need to go get one of these other feel-good hormones. And the fastest way that we do that in modern society today is we turn to food. Before we know it, we've got a spoonful of ice cream in our mouth, or we turn to alcohol. We crack open a beer or a bottle of wine, or we go shopping, right? We jump on Amazon, or we're down at Best Buy or the Apple Store, whatever it may be for you. But those are the 3 primary ways that we as modern humans extinguish cortisol. And if we're on social media, or if we're on the media today, we're getting bombarded with messages that induce fear and stress. And so it's training us and creating this hard wiring in our brain of a lifetime of these habits of get stress, feel anxiety, go eat, go drink, and go shopping. And I can't think of a better description for the American way than that. right? And so if you have a brain that, as this habit continues, neurons that fire together wire together, we've all heard that from Tony and others. Well, now that becomes the default pathway in your behavior and in your brain. And so you're going to pursue one of those three things as soon as you feel stressed without even thinking about it. You're not even going to be aware of what it is that you're doing before you do it, for the most part. And that ends up causing what I call, or creating, an inverted dopamine response, meaning an unhealthy or upside down dopamine response. So now we get dopamine when we go do things that are bad for our health, or go spend money. And that becomes our default program. And if you have that default program, it is literally going to be impossible for you to build wealth over a long period of time. It's impossible, because your default mode to get pleasure is to spend money, whether it's on food, alcohol, or stuff. And so that's why so many people, who go through like a Dave Ramsey program or these other programs, they're common sense. They work. Like the envelope method works. But there's such a low success rate with those because it requires discipline. It requires conscious effort and willpower to go against your default pattern. And it's just like trying to diet, right? So when you have your default pattern over here, which requires zero effort and zero thought and zero energy because it's your default mode, and then you try to consciously change that over here and lose 20 pounds and change your diet and go to the gym and do all of these things with willpower, this eventually runs out and gets tired, and then it fades away. And then this default just comes back, and then boom, you're back into the same pattern that you've always had your entire life. And so that's why people have trouble when it comes to money as well. And what I realized is like, hey, well, there's some individuals out there like, the Warren Buffett type, and a few of my other friends who can just keep the money they make, and it gives them joy to do it. And it actually causes stress when they spend money. I mean, that's Warren Buffett, right? He gets stressed out when he spends money. That's why he lives in the same house he's lived in for 40 years. But he gets pleasure, he gets dopamine when he saves and invests money. And so that what I would call a normalized dopamine response, or a healthy one. And so if you have that as your default program, you will become wealthy and rich effortlessly. And it will not require effort because that is your default mode.
Right.
If you don't have that, then it's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be a conscious struggle, and you're going to go back into these loops, make it, spend it, risk it, make it, spend it, risk it, make it, spend it, risk it, your whole life, until you figure out, one, that this is going on, and then two, how to reprogram it. And so that was really the big gift that came out of this process for me, is I became aware of the make it, spend it, risk it cycle that I'd been stuck in. And then I became aware of how it operated and what caused it. And then I became aware of how to reprogram it and change it. And that's really been one of the biggest gifts that's come out of this health crisis for me, is that I was able to reprogram that dopamine response. I got rid of all the sports cars. I set up basically a system that we use that retrains the brain to get a dopamine response when you save money now instead of spending it. And then we focused the last year on building passive investment income sources that have now replaced, all of our bills and that cover all of our typical stuff, home bills, car bills, and all of those things, so that if I never had to work again, we're fine. Like all of that stuff is covered, and I literally don't have to work anymore. But that wouldn't be possible if I had not figured out the neurochemistry component and the subconscious program component. Right. If you're not aware of those, you have zero chance of ever making a lasting change in your life when it comes to money.
You were just able to articulate what I have known in the back of my mind for the last 20 years of being an entrepreneur. Yeah. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head right there. So thank you very much on a personal level. It felt like I just went through some sort of therapy session, like a personal therapy session. But
it's liberating, because I mean, that's what it was, a huge light bulb moment for me, because now you're not a victim of these invisible forces anymore. And the moment you have this light bulb, you're now empowered to like, oh, I can see what's happening now. And the moment you see what's happening, you can take ownership of it. And so thank you very much for that, because it was just as liberating and as big of an epiphany for me as anything else, kind of like that in my life, that it's like there's a before this and then there's an after this, and life is never the same once you kind of have that awareness. So